there are three huge works of art that Vince Gilligan has produced. First one being Breaking Bad, obviously. Second one being El Camino, and the one about today's video, Better Call Saul. And when I was first introduced to it, I was hesitant about watching the show because I thought it was a little bit boring, and I thought the build-up was kind of slow, but I was wrong. And I'm pleasantly surprised that the show is actually pretty good. The first season of Breaking Bad did take its time to build a little bit up, you know. This is like why I thought Better Call Saul wasn't going to be as good, because the first season of Breaking Bad didn't jump right into the action. And looking back on it, it kind of makes sense because, you know, they had a whole lot of characters to set up. They had to set up the plot, you know, that way they could keep going up from it. And I think the pacing of it did a pretty good job, because at the end of season one, you were kind of already like introduced to the universe, and then from there they could just build on. I finished watching the show, and I reached out to my friend who really pushed me to watch the Breaking Bad, and I was talking to him about it, you know, about the ending and like all these questions that I had, and he was like, well, actually you can watch these other shows and this other movie because they'll help explain the backstory a little bit better. And from when he told me that to when I actually started watching it was about 2 years. I know, kind of a long time, but I eventually turned a leaf. And the reason why is because I was talking to my dad about the show, because it came up on Netflix, and he was like, yeah, I couldn't get into Breaking Bad, but I got into Better Call Saul, and he was like, that was a pretty good show. So I was like, well, my dad doesn't like Breaking Bad because he thought the pacing was slow, so maybe Better Call Saul's got to be faster, you know? And it turns out he was right, you know, the show is actually pretty good. And I guess my favorite part about the show is that it knows it's not Breaking Bad. Like, it's not trying to jump right into the ship and give you all of these Breaking Bad references, you know, like, oh, like that's Walter White, you know, like they're trying to build up who Saul is. And it seems to me that they're probably gonna tie in his story like towards the end of the show into Breaking Bad, instead of just jumping right in, because I think it takes place like 6 years before like the events of Breaking Bad. And so we get to really see who like Jimmy is, who aka is Saul, and it's kind of cool. I've now completed the first 2 seasons of the show, and so this is going to be the spoiler warning before I really start diving in. Spoiler warning over. Okay. Well, I really love the setup and storytelling of Jimmy, because it tells us like how he started to become a lawyer. Like, he didn't just decide that that's what he wanted to do. It actually shows us that he was kind of a screw up. Like, if it wasn't for his brother giving him like an opportunity when he got like caught in jail or whatever to like start over, then like Jimmy would have been like a criminal. Like, his nickname was like Slippin' Jimmy, where he did like a lot of like fraud, car scams and stuff. And so for him to be given an opportunity is like, it's really cool to see, and it kind of helps us like resonate with his character, because there were a couple like of emotional scenes where I was like, in my head I'm like, I'm rooting for him, you know, like, come on Jimmy, you can do it. And then of course, like, Jimmy being Jimmy has to mess up something, because he has to go outside of the bounds of law, or outside of the bounds of normal morals, to try and get something done. And then you just kind of left believing like, like, why did he have to do that, you know? Right away we get to know that Jimmy doesn't like this guy named Howard, who's the co-head of this company that his brother Chuck owns. And we learn that Chuck has to be taken care of by Jimmy because he's sick and has this condition where he's allergic to electricity. We don't know exactly why that started, but we find out that that's not like a real thing. It's just all in Chuck's head. And the whole first season is like showing Jimmy taking care of his brother while also trying to like make a living. And he has unorthodox ways of trying to get clients the right way, or find the right answer for them. But it all comes crashing down like at the end of the season, where he finds this really big case, and his brother's helping him like find all of these like legal boundaries, and they realize that it's too much for them too, so they have to go to Chuck's firm and talk to Howard about partnering on this thing. And Howard doesn't want to give Jimmy a spot in the office to work, and Jimmy's obviously very upset by it. But we find out that it's actually because of Chuck that didn't happen, because Chuck's ego is like through the roof, and he was like, well, it's not fair that you had all these chances and that you ended up becoming a lawyer through some university that I guess isn't up to Chuck's standards. And he was like, you're not a real lawyer, and I don't want you working at my firm because I want to be better than you. And that would like really sucked. That was like super emotional. It kind of like resonated with me, because I've had moments in life where like I felt like that type of like betrayal, and it was like just was just really sad. This leads us into season 2, where Jimmy is obviously upset at his brother, but because of how big the case is, HHM, which is the name of the firm that Chuck owns, it partners up with another law firm to take on this case, and that partner law firm wanted to give Jimmy a job. And so he ends up working for this big law firm, and at first he tries to make it work, but it's obviously not for him because he likes to go outside of the normal boundaries to try and make things work, and people are getting frustrated by that, especially because they're partnered with Chuck, and Chuck is trying to poke at him every single chance he can to like prove that Jimmy's not doing his job the right way. So he ends up getting in trouble before eventually leaving, and this causes his friend Kim, who is his romantic interest but also his friend, to get in trouble because she was bending over backwards trying to vouch for him, and she gets sent into like this paperwork room instead of getting to do like real legal work. She's like bound to looking at typos and documents. So she decides to try to get in their good graces again by trying to find this big client, and she ends up getting them. But then towards the end of the season, she realizes that her partnership with HHM isn't going anywhere because they didn't end up taking her out of that paperwork bin. They left her in there, and they keep telling her that she's not ready to be a partner yet. This other law firm comes around and offers it to her, and she realizes that she wants to start up her own business instead. So then she fights for the clients to see like who can keep them, HHM or her, and she ends up getting them at the end, but it's because Jimmy goes out of his way to sabotage Chuck and make Chuck look bad in front of the clients, and then they end up leaving to go work with Kim. And this sets up the end of the season where Chuck tries to get a confession out of Jimmy by manipulating him, which he ended up getting done. That kind of wraps up the quick synopsis of season 1 and season 2. And I wanted to talk about the things that I thought they did really well and the things that I'm not liking as much. The things that I think are going really well are the character building. Again, I really like that they're setting up who Jimmy is before he becomes Saul. It helps us sympathize with him because we see that he's like a mess up who's trying to get his life back on track. And I think it makes it really easy to like resonate just because of the scenes that it shows us. Like, it shows us that yes, he's like messed with people before, but most of the time he has his heart in the right place. And even though he goes out of the bounds of the normal law to get things done, it's always to try and get the best outcome or what he thinks is the right outcome. I also really like the character building for Mike and Kim. They're the co-stars of the show, and so Mike, who was the big bad hitman in Breaking Bad, but in this show, like we see where he starts out, and he's actually just like a retired cop. He left because his son was killed by a couple cops, and so before he leaves, he ends up killing those corrupt cops and then coming to Albuquerque, and that's where he's with his, what do you call it, like daughter-in-law and his grandchild, because they're in Albuquerque. I'm assuming that they moved there after his son was killed, and he goes to be closer to them, and we see that he starts to go back into being like corrupt and trying to do all these like small businesses or small business adventures on the side. I think it's really good because it shows that he's doing all these little side projects, and he's starting to get slowly involved into like the cartel world, but not necessarily just getting thrown right into it. I also really like the subplots, and this kind of ties into like Mike's story because it's separate from Saul's, but it's also like building who Mike is and like how he gets involved into the Breaking Bad universe. And I really like the introduction of Ignacio. He has been like a really cool character, and he's like the main cartel guy that we've been exposed to most of this time. I think he's made like a really nice addition because he's got like motives, but we also don't know like where his story fits in because he's a new character. And I also really like the Salamanca story because it's kind of tying in their origins, like what they're up to. What I'm not liking so far about the show is the stakes, just because a lot of the main characters that we see here are also main characters in Breaking Bad. And so we know that there's not necessarily anything that could happen to them that would be considered like extreme or like really hanging off the cliff type of moments, just because we know like at the end that they're still going to make it. And so it kind of eliminates a little bit of the suspense, but the stakes are still really important because like Ignacio is a new character that we haven't met. Hector Salamanca, like he's up and walking normal like before he's sitting in that chair, you know. And so I guess like some of the stakes are there, but not necessarily for the main characters, for like sub characters in the future show, so that way we can see like how they ended up getting from like where they're at to later on in the events. One other thing I didn't really like is the plot for Mike at the beginning, because we get this whole backstory for him where he was a corrupt cop and then he retired because his son got killed by a couple of other corrupt cops. When he moves to Albuquerque, it seemed to be for a fresh start, but then after telling his backstory to his daughter-in-law, he told her that because these cops came trying to like dig up the case and see like who killed these ex-cops, and obviously it was Mike. He even like admits to it to her, and he tells her like, it's up to you, you can decide if you want to be honest with them or not. I'm okay with it, but the question is, are you okay with like living with it? And I thought that was pretty powerful. But then right after that scene and the cops end up leaving because she doesn't rat him out, he kind of just decides to go back to being corrupt and doing like all these small time deals. But I guess it was important to like see that, just because it mattered for his first few jobs where people were trying to get him to become a hitman, and he was like, no, I don't really want to do that. But then afterwards we're seeing that he's trying to kill Hector Salamanca, and so his like moral code just kind of like shaky a little bit. But I thought it was a nice like backstory into showing where his head is at and like why he moved to Albuquerque and like how he got back into this stuff. So overall, the show has been really good. I like that it's not rushing itself and it's trying to be separate from Breaking Bad. It just so happens to be in the same universe. And I like that it's creating its own identity, and I'm excited to see where the show goes in the next few seasons and how it all wraps up together. That's about it. Those are all my thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great day.